be able to do this, so I could jump at the chance once they indicated that I would be a reasonable one to fit under the bus for the first try of these virtual regional meetings, as it were. And so I'd also like to thank Amos as well for assisting with participation, dissemination of information. So we hope that that's also an opportunity for Amos and the Safety Codes Council to continue their relationship and take advantage of some opportunities as we go into the future. When we start opening up the province and doing things differently and looking to the fall and potential meetings, I think this is a great opportunity to take advantage of some of the wonderful work that's being done both by the Safety Codes Council and by the Alberta Mechanical Officials Society. So there is a bit of a statement in support of those organizations. I've always indicated the importance I see in the safety system in Alberta and in the associations that recognize those regulators that are often the leaders in the industry. Today's going to be no different. We're going to talk about much of the same thing. We'll get off of my name slide onto at least another one, so that we can see. Today we're going to be talking about lots of information, and I'm going to try to stay on topic because I did bring, as always, lots of stuff. Some of it's got some pictures to be able to hold some information and to apply some of this. But today's presentation is going to mostly be about the B149 codes and what's coming up. But there is a little bit of housekeeping in it, and there's also going to be a bit a reference to some plumbing stuff in the end of the presentation. So again, don't forget to add your questions as we go along, and look for opportunities, because municipal affairs, myself and the rest of the team here are certainly in a position to be able to continue to support. So questions that come to you after, or you don't feel like adding, do forward them on to myself or the duty officer. We'll do our best to make sure that we've got information for everybody. Some of the housekeeping for this presentation is starting with the Safety Codes Council website, and it's really about the availability of codes. Now that the codes are available for viewing, it's a bigger statement, because it's about the gas codes, it's about the plumbing codes, the building codes. It's also about reference standards. CSA now has ability to access all of their reference standards for viewing, and this trend is moving on into underwriters' laboratories, as well as National Sanitation Foundation, NSF. So we're seeing this trend for accessibility on the standards, and along with that, there are some other changes that are going to impact what codes and standards look like in the future. But for now, this was a way of saying, make sure you get out there and look at it. But also, if you're having challenges with customers, permit holders, homeowners, those that seem to be struggling with some of the requirements, you can let them know this information is available for free now. There's no reason why somebody should say they don't have access to the code. But it can be difficult to get to, and there's always limitations around how much you can download or print. But the information is there. It'd be great to get it out to the people that we find consistently struggle with it the most. Municipal Affairs has changed websites, gone to an alberta.ca type of information, and this is going to be available, at least as far as I understand, with the Safety Codes Council. So this kind of information will get you there. But in changing the way that we look at the website and manage it, the website's become somewhat difficult to maneuver, but at the same time, there are many search engines out there that make it much easier to kind of get to and get through some of this stuff. So do keep that in mind, and this information is intended to be available for everybody. Oh, got to watch what happens to that screen. This slide shows a list of recognized Canadian symbols. So these are organizations that are accredited by the Standards Council of Canada to certify products for the Canadian market. This is critical in gas because our regulations require that products be certified or approved. So we're looking for these kind of labels all the time. And we look for small C's or small CA's or a CSA label, something that gives us the confidence of that. This is again about the introduction of the CETA agreement. That's the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement between Canada and the European Union to establish an ability to move products that are certified in Europe into the Canadian market and vice versa, to move the Canadian standards or Canadian products into the European market. And so I keep telling the industry we're going to see this grow by hundreds, this list. But there's been some real challenges with politics and with countries getting along. And so I keep using this as a reminder, watch these things, keep mindful of the certification of products, because it's going to be a steep curve once these agreements get finally ratified. At the moment, there's a bunch of people between Canada and Europe that are having a problem with dotting the I's and crossing the T's on the agreement. And so it's put us essentially 2 years back. So I've been warning everybody, but I don't want the industry to lose sight of the fact that this is going to happen and these are going to grow. And so I'm not sure how we'll manage those lists, but we will be working with groups like the Standards Council of Canada and the Canadian Institute of Plumbing and Heating. So we'll be watching those kinds of things as well. Now, looking at the B149s, the 2020, this is just some of the data around it. They're published, they're available for sale. The 3-column documents that Alberta builds around them are complete. They're available for circulation. These were big documents, and we've culled them down into more reasonable information that's available electronically. It's available through the Safety Codes Council and through Municipal Affairs. So they are posted with the council for those who have access, and request for anybody who's attending this can get access to those documents. And that's for the full suite of codes that we adopt within the regulation. We expect February 1st, 2021 for the B149s to come into effect. There doesn't seem to be anything setting that off. Even some concerns around COVID and our challenges we've been facing at this time doesn't appear to be impacting that. I also don't want to miss in the B149 discussion that the B108 is adopted as well as the B109, but I've just put in here as a note that B108-18 came into force in 2019. The 108 and the 109 are on 3-year cycles as compared to a 5-year cycle, so you'll see them pop up more and more in new versions as we rotate through cycles. And so I have a couple of slides a little bit later on where we'll talk a little bit more in the details around what's happening with the 108 and the 109 for those who have some interest in the natural gas vehicles and fueling stations. This is, I've got a couple of slides in this presentation like this that kind of keep us on topic for the major things. So these are the big things, kind of a snapshot of what we've seen in the codes. And like the last few cycles, there's been a lot of work to move propane stuff into the propane handling code, installation stuff back into the B149.1, vehicle stuff, make sure it goes into B149.5, and then what's part of an installation versus what's part of a piece of equipment or an appliance, and let's get them separated so that we don't have installers trying to figure out how to deal with approvals and certification of products that needs to go somewhere else. So there's been lots of that movement, and again, lots of clarification to align with things that are happening in standards, both in updates, but as well as I've used a language in here regarding a vehicle refueling appliance, a VFA, regarding VRA. So we've used VRA for decades, but nobody else globally uses that. So this code now aligns with those reference standards, and we're going to see lots more of that type of work as natural gas expands out into different markets. Things like bonding, we're going to talk about that then a little bit here as well, but also high altitude requirements. As we get more high altitude requirements in standards, there's pressure to get it out of the codes. But we've fought to keep it in the codes because in particularly in Alberta, we're one of the only high altitude places in Canada or North America for that matter, because there's such a low population in high altitude other places where most of the province has these requirements. So I tend to be a big fan of these, and it was really positive to see retention of high altitude requirements and some clarifications come into this code. Relief valves, we're going to talk about that a bit, and I want to trigger everybody that's listening here. Keep in mind that the changes to regulations, relief valves, and those types of things, how we pipe them, how we vent them, that's become probably the biggest change within core work of the B149.1, and it's probably a meeting unto itself. So for Amos, it may be something to think about. Do we want to set up, some special training for relief valves, regulators, and how we manage those things? Because there's been a lot of work around the high pressure, low pressure, lighter than air, heavier than air gases, and all of those kinds of things. And that is, you'll see as we go through the presentation, that's going to be one of the more challenging ones because across Canada, some people really struggled with regulators and relief valves over the past few generations, and we've kept adding stuff to the code and adding stuff to the code, and this was a significant rework to be able to move some stuff into appendixes, as well as clarify some stuff into the code to try to make it a better fit. But this isn't a simple process, so we're going to need to work at it as a team to make sure Alberta's ready for that as we go into 2021. Sizing for new materials, I got CSST in here. That was a big one to align the types of, or how we size it because of the actual internal diameter and some of the flow restrictions that are considered with CSST. So we're getting that recognized rather than comparing it to black iron or copper piping. And welding requirements. We'll talk quite a bit of detail on that. Again, it's going to be for third parties, but safety codes officers, designers are really going to need to be aware of the intent of welding in the code has continued to grow and has always been there, but often not well regulated. Connectors, gas valves, some purging stuff, manufacturer's instructions. Again, some really good work this year, or this code cycle, but some really big changes. Engines, turbines, and compressors are being moved. That's part of the first bullet I talked about, but it's really just the approval and the evaluation of these appliances and equipment, and not the installation. The installation of these is still part of the B149 and still part of the role of the safety codes officer and the gas fitter holding the permit. So we'll be talking about some challenges, and I have an ask for all the safety codes officers regarding those engines, and I'll make a big deal about that a little later on this morning. Schedule 10 piping, that introduction, particularly for press connect, or I use press fit here, but there's a number of different terminology, but staying away from threading. In theory, everybody knows that you can't thread Schedule 10, but for some reason, there's a terrible fear about people willing to try that. So that's going to be a thing to keep in mind. Last was the metric versus the pipe designation. And what happened was that in order to move towards a metrified or metric code, we had to recognize, and got some really good support this year, leave the pipe alone. 2-inch pipe is 2-inch pipe, and it may not have anything to do with inside diameter or outside diameter, depending on whether it's Schedule 40, whether it's plastic, whether it's corrugated, whatever the case may be. So now we've got a code that has generic pipe sizing when we're talking about something. When we're talking about 3/4-inch pipe, we're talking about 3/4-inch pipe. We're not talking about a metric equivalent. And so there's been some stuff that has helped us with that. Okay, so here's one. I've been talking about this for a couple of years for those that have seen some of my presentations, but this was a great slide come up with Perry had made this one. This is where CSA says that we're no longer going to mark up the codes. And so in here, we've talked about there's no more bold italics. So there's nothing that identifies a defined term. You got to take the definitions and figure out where they go in the code. That's also going to apply to, there's no markups indicating the changes in the code. So there's no bold, there's no underline, there's no markups. The codes come clean, and it's up to us to figure out what to do. So the 3-column documents are probably the best way to get that confidence. And I'm not saying it's necessarily a shortcut, but CSA has made a bunch of work for every individual by managing some of their risk through disconnecting or discontinuing the ability to do this. There are a number of codes changing this way. We're not the only one, but do watch that because it's going to be some real challenge. Now that we've started talking about some definitions, there's lots of them in there. And so I didn't bring up a number of them, but this is one: safe location. So there was challenges nationally regarding what is the safe location. If we got a terminal for a vent and it used to say outside, well, that's fine. But what happens when you're outside in an industrial site? What happens if you're outside and you terminate by the spot where people walk along with their cigarettes? And so this was about trying to consider those other things. And also, what happens when you've got unknowns like raw gas, sour gas, sweet gas, dirty gas? All of these kinds of things are starting to be better embraced within the code. So this, as well as some others, is part of where that's been going. So do keep that. We've changed some things with variances in the through municipal affairs, allowing broader use of variances for jurisdiction-wide applications, and this is going to be continued on for variances through not just reductions in clearances, but also too for equipment and materials. And so this is going to continue to be challenging over the next few years, and going to be opportunities for safety codes officers to really say we're ready for this, or what they need to get ready for this. Because a lot of times in the past, we were able to say, do safety codes officers want to do this or not? And the direction from government is changing that. These are going to be moved to the municipality. So you're going to want to be able to consider those variances that are only issued by an administrator are going to become the responsibility of the authority having jurisdiction. Now, one example of that is regulators. We provide a province-wide variance. I'm just going to skip ahead. We can come back to that picture. And so what happened with relief valves was that the code in 2015 struggled to maintain or didn't maintain the requirements for the 6.22 and 6.18 valves. And so we created a variance to be able to allow these reduced clearance type regulators to be installed. And so by having the OPCO, the overpressure cutoff type regulators that are certified, are now available through this application. And this Standata is going to expire. So on or about February 1st, this is going to disappear because it's in the new code. This got fixed. It's part of the B149.1, and we're no longer going to continue that. And so these types of valves, the regulators, will be available, and they're used almost exclusively by utilities, and so they're typically outside of our jurisdiction within the gas field, but lots of people see them and they struggle with the clearances. And so the variances help bridge some gaps between what the utility is doing and what we're actually able to accept under the code. And now the code's going to align with that. So that information's available on the website through the Standata. Also, too, I'd mentioned bonding a bit before. This is a great picture because it shows a bonding directly to plastic, which essentially means nothing. But what's critical about this change in the code is it's now the gas fitter's responsibility to bond. That doesn't mean it's your responsibility to push the electrician out of the way and make sure the bonding's done, but it's your responsibility to be able to recognize that there is an electrician there, that electrician is doing the bonding, you have no requirements. In the event you're replacing a furnace, an appliance, doing something like that, and it impacts the bonding, it's now your responsibility as a gas fitter to do that, and the responsibility of the safety codes officer to make sure that this is maintained. So do keep that in mind. We want to recognize that the bonding, it becomes a bit of an issue with that because they're concerned about lightning strikes. It's been a problem in the States, and we've discontinued these types of corrugated stainless steel tubing in the States. They're all now a black heavy jacket on them, but the yellow jacket is still approved and is still being manufactured and still coming to Canada. And so it's expected that in some time in the future, this is all going to go away, and we're not going to see any yellow jacket just because the market will quit making it. But do keep that in mind as we go forward. So we're worried about lightning strikes. That's the driver, but it's this bonding that's going to be the critical thing that we're going to need to start looking at and learning how to do the bonding depending upon the material, whether it's black iron, copper, corrugated stainless steel tubing, and make sure that the requirements are met as identified within the gas code. Pressure regulators. I've had a look at, I've been living in this code for a while. So what I've done here is I've just put up 5.2 pressure regulators and 5211. And that clause basically, is identifying the scope of the requirements for regulators, identifying minimums and maximums. What this clause does is it identifies there are 30 clauses following this up to about section 5.6.4, and it includes what's now renamed as Table 5.2 for pressure protection device set point requirements. This is a monster change. And so rather than going in and taking this morning and talking about that, do keep in mind that if you take one note away from today, make it pressure regulators, make it section 5 point, oh, well, section 5. And that section 5 of the code is going to have the biggest changes that are going to affect you guys day to day. So as you're looking at gas systems, some of this other stuff will depend upon what a contractor does or doesn't do. But with pressure regulators, this is going to be a big one. And really about, again, high pressure, low pressure, variations in pressure, as well as protections, reliefs, and heavier than air, lighter than air gases, and a lot of clarification to try to address that, those specific requirements. Breast Connect, we talked about that a bit. I put up here one of the principal ones that identify Schedule 10 within the codes. And that because we've had issues regarding piping over 2.5 is welded, well, there's a move towards having piping over 2.5 to 4 inch be allowed as a press connect. And so these changes to introduce Schedule 10 is the big one. And you'll probably see more and more of that, because I think it's really cost effective, and it's reasonable that we'll be seeing huge amounts of press connect come within certain contract styles, because once you get the tools, this is fast. It's easy to put in. We're going to have the same troubles as others with underground stuff, with yellow jacketing and issues that may come up regarding stainless steel and etc. So be mindful that there's lots of ways of looking at this, and that there is reference standards that we're expecting these products to be certified to. Our regulation still requires that. It shall be certified or approved. So you shouldn't get some fly-by-night group trying to fit in one type of material that's incompatible. Call these guys out on them and make sure that they're holding true on their requirements and documentation. This is really where the industry needs to grow into that manufacturer's installation instruction. Where's the installation instructions for this press connect? Where's the installation instructions for that furnace, hot water tank? How do you know it's compliant if those instructions aren't there? So it's making it harder and harder to do an inspection and to accept an installation if you don't have access to current, accurate manufacturer's installation instructions. So do watch that. Piping practices. There's a number of changes within the code under piping practices, but test ports is a new one. So what the code change proposals came in said the line pressure regulators have to be accurate where they're installed, because once you go through other valves and through a bunch of other restrictions, change in directions, we're not getting a sense of compliance with the requirements identified in standards for line pressure regulators. So by putting in a test port immediately downstream of a line pressure regulator, or as close as practicable, that gives us an opportunity to test these products and to find out that they're working within the scope of their certification, and it helps us manage some of the realities in variations that come into installs. All right, and you got to have you know, one of these things that show up every once in a while. We've been talking about projects where we've got an appliance that's discharging ice in this case, and that's probably unsafe. At some point that could create a risk, but we're also looking at hazardous frost and ice accumulations that impact adjoining properties. With commercial sites, this can be really tough when you're right on the property line, but also too, there's a real move across Canada to start getting some of this stuff out of the gas code and into building codes or other places where it fits better. If we're trying to deal with adjoining properties, we need support from other organizations. And this will apply to access to roofs and walkways and guardrails. Some of those kinds of things were never really a good fit in the gas code. So there is pressure to move that stuff into a building code application, and in challenge, or in, to give us some opportunities to get the right people doing the right things. So if we can make sure that a gas fitter or HVAC installation doesn't terminate a unit that has this much of a problem with water, but also too, some of the other protections that can be afforded need to go where they belong. Another one here, this is a great opportunity to identify that you can't mix a PVC pipe with CPVC pipe. And in the event that that was ABS, well, there's the problem. But there is other things that could be noted in this slide. So it's not just my concern with 636 venting systems. There may be other risks here that some could advise. I see a few of you as I'm watching on the screen, scrunching your eyes. I'm assuming you can find other things wrong with this besides the improper use of plastic. But it might be, maybe it's the glue that bugs you, or maybe it's the spacing. Maybe it's the attachment of the plastic to the draft hood. I'm not sure what it is, but there's other things there that you might be able to identify as an error. But it gives us an opportunity to change into thinking about some other things. So the gas codes have now recognized that when we do some of these installations, like the last one over there, you want to make sure the venting's properly, and it is venting to the outside and doing those things. Well, purging's become an issue. In North America, there's been some terrible disasters, and not that far past, where purging extremely large gas lines has resulted in an unusual discharge of natural gas, and once it finds an ignition, it causes some real problems. So this is evidence of that has shown up into the code that says if we get big enough lines and enough volume, enough length, we need to be looking at this different, and we need to be purging differently, addressing it differently, and this goes on into quite a bit of detail regarding other requirements for purging. So do watch that, particularly with large lines. And large links, and that make sure that people are thinking about this, particularly in those industrial settings where there can be unusual collections. Welding's a big one, because welding used to say, make sure it's welded and make sure it's good. Make sure it don't leak. And it don't say that anymore. So welding says a whole bunch of things, and there's significant clauses regarding how to test this, how to manage some of these things, and who the responsibility is, because it's not necessarily the safety codes officer that has to do this, but somebody has to do it, and that's identified through the requirements of Annex J. And I'll just go to that. Not to minimize the prescriptive code requirements, because there's a whack of them with the gas side, but do keep in mind that Annex J is normative. That means it's a mandatory part of the code. You shall do this. This isn't a suggestion. This isn't a guideline like the informative annex. This is normative. So by putting all of this information that essentially follows models out of the Z662 piping code, it gives us an opportunity to look at things. So there's pages of stuff under here for welding. Make sure you guys look at it, and it's basically about how do we make sure that the installers doing this, the general contractor, has identified who the installation contractor is, how they're going to do this work, and then you'll be able to have documentation for this. It's going to be relatively simple for small diameter, small applications, but the larger applications become more rigid, and this document's going to give you some guidelines that the package you're going to be able to expect from an installer, you've got some tools to look at that package and have it mean something. So do start working with welding and those kinds of things. And like I said, the sections on welding, do make sure that you have a familiarity with those and that reference to Annex J. Okay, Annex K is informative. It's about pressure regulators. So everything that was about, isn't this nice, here's some good ideas, here's a way of looking at how regulators and overpressure protection devices work. All of that was moved into the informative annex to give you some information. There's lots of documentation. It's not a mandatory part of the code, but it's a significant way of explaining what the prescriptive requirements are. So now we've had so much change in regulators and OPPDs that now there's going to be a need to be able to keep familiar with Annex K and make sure you're spending some time with them. Annex M. Here's another normative one. This is quite unusual. We haven't historically had a lot of normative or prescriptive requirements in the form of an annex. So that way, like pipe sizing in the gas codes has always been informative. We follow it because it follows the math that's identified in the prescriptive requirements of the code. But if somebody wants to use the math and not follow those tables, they can. It's just that everybody finds out in the end that the tables are right, and so you know, they can twist that math around however they want, but in the end everybody kind of goes back to the tables, even though they're informative. This one here is normative, and this is about pyrotechnics. This is about movies, different sporting events, stuff like that. This is about the dragon in the West Edmonton Mall that we used to have, and it's also about the flame at the Calgary Flames. We don't worry about it too much because that flame doesn't go off very often. And so, you know, but there are other projects out there that are concerned, and so it's great. We've actually got some stuff in the code that we've always kind of struggled to try to figure out how do you do this. When you're going to have a look at a special event with unusual natural gas, propane, other types of gases, this gives you an opportunity to do this, and it gives you some authority. If somebody says, "Who are you and what are you doing here?" Well, there it is. Okay, there's also other additional annexes that have been added. They're informative, but you know, safety valves and automatic vent valves for gas turbines. This isn't about approval of the turbine, but this is about acceptance of the installation. So there's some information there that'll give you some extra guidance. And then because we've moved so much into the B149.3, the Annex N actually helps bridge that. It's basically giving you some information right in the B149.1 that says this is why, or this is how to deal with the prescriptive requirements in the B149.1 and bridge into the approval requirements out of the B149.3. So do keep watching that as we go forward. Odorization is, it's not a new topic, but it's still, the industry is still struggling with it. There's a requirement in the gas code for odorization to be maintained, whether it's propane or whether it's natural gas. So we expect the industry to continue to grow with that. And I use this as a heads up. You guys just keep watching for it, and don't be scared to ask, where's your odorization or your compliance? And so that's detection, monitoring. There are other ways of reaching that prescriptive requirement. The B149.2, lots of stuff the same as the B149.1. It Basically, we moved, fixed, clarified, did a bunch of things to hopefully make it a cleaner, more applicable storage and handling code. The lots about cylinder exchange systems, some introduction on some small stuff about 1-pounders, and some of those challenges. Exemptions for hot air balloons, and we'll talk about that in a bit, as well as vaporizers. And so we'll go into some more detail there. But the B149.2 was one of the cleaner codes in this cycle. There's been a few incidents across Canada where cylinder exchange, but others have this plastic coating on the outside edge of it that causes corrosion and some leaking. And so we've had some issues. We actually had a report in the last couple of months here in Alberta where a container leaked with deterioration under one of these sleeves. The new code says that sleeve shall be removed every time it's filled. And so whether you take it to a local co-op or to an exchange system, that exchange system can't take it back and refill it without removing that sleeve every time. And so hopefully we don't see any of this or this discontinue, and it should be a fairly hard stop. Some of the industries already embraced it because they know it's coming, and so it'll help. But I know training's being updated for propane filling attendants to be able to recognize this type of a change. For those of you who are all excited about riding in a hot air balloon, oh, there's lots of stuff that's coming in there. There's now responsibilities for whoever's in this and operating or driving or flying. Flying this piece of equipment is required to understand some stuff about propane and to know some things. And that it can be filled without removing it from the basket. That created some problems. You take all this weight out of there, they're really hard to hold on the ground. And so there were some good reasons for doing that. They need to log how they do this, how they fill it, how often they do it. The crew member shall be present. A number of things in there. And that, again, there's choices. If they want to remove them and they got it tied down good enough, or they don't have a balloon full of hot air, they can remove these. But there's now a way to fill these in place. So that's hopefully going to relieve some challenges for a unique perspective of the organization. And for those of you that are watching Safety Codes officers, you know who that backside is. The guy with the gloves in his back pocket, you know which Safety Codes officer I'm talking about. Okay. Right, dispensing systems. All I wanted to focus on in this one is right in the middle of the pictures, K15. And what that's doing is that we've got a global pressure on vehicles. So dispensing, filling is all going global. So we no longer have a Canadian adapter anymore. And so they're all moving into the ISO style. So this type K15, and there are others, as well as how do we deal with all of the installations in Canada that have fuel dispensers that aren't K15? Well, every new vehicle's K15, but every old vehicle isn't. So there's going to be a transition time. And so it's placed right in the body of the code as to how we do this. Automated cylinder exchange machines. There were some problems in the old code where they couldn't manage the fire suppression requirements for automatic exchange systems. So following what was coming in the code, we provided a province-wide variance to allow this industry to do things just a little bit differently. And what I found is that they're complying with the requirements of the code, except for this part. So the picture on the right is one of mine. I actually took it at a Walmart here in Edmonton. The other one is a stock feature. But the problem is that all of these automatic exchange systems following this variance are being installed extremely close to smoking sections. And so that's creating a problem. I put a challenge out to the Canadian Propane Association and others and said, fix this. I'll pull the variance. We'll pull the ability to use these products if you can't get the smoking area away from it. I actually got a new picture here 2 weeks ago, and I'm actually starting a process with Walmart, and you're all welcome to help as well. Is that if you have this, I'd appreciate any help you can going in there. Let's find a manager and let's get this moved. Get the propane moved, get the smoking section moved, make it difficult for people to use this as a shield to light their cigarettes. Lots of additional requirements for protection and clarification around that, and some good drivers as to why we do what we do, because there's some things that have really worked around cages and around maximum size of mesh and ventilation and structure and how we tie something down, and then how they take it out to the field and drive a truck into it. And some of these are fun to watch, but there's good background on many of these code changes as to why we're headed this way. Here's one of my stock pictures that I continue to love, and this was a fire on a vaporizer that triggered a relief valve and a discharge of product that continued to fire, but it did actually, it was located in a safe enough location that the propane could be shut off and the building could be protected, and the load source used up until we were able to get the fire out. Now what's happening is that we talked to the industry, and I've been saying to safety codes officers and others for years that as of January 1st, 2021, the ORD DC 1349 shall be used. So that means vaporizers shall be certified. This doesn't apply retroactively, so old ones that exist on existing installations, no problem, but new ones shall be certified. And now it's actually in the code, so great. We've got this in the code. The ORD is now a recognized Canadian standard for the purposes of certification, and so vaporizers shall be certified. Here's another a vaporizer variance that came in saying we can't get 25 feet away from the tank and 25 feet away from the vaporizer and do this on construction sites, and there's no reason to do this. So we allowed for a deviation from the clearance to the tank and put in some additional requirements like remote shutoffs, and there's lots of ways of doing that. I still see all of these things with these fancy remote shutoffs that have been disabled. The cable's removed off of them. So hey guys, when you're looking on site, make sure they're meeting the code and not pretending to meet the code. So again, watch that. Here's a plug in case nobody knows who's me on this video chat. This is one of my Perry is really good at throwing me under the bus with that one, but it's a great slide to talk about these variances. Don't relax the code requirements. Don't accept something that's less than the minimum requirements. You know, if you're going to issue a variance, it has to be done in writing. What we're continuing to struggle with is all of the anecdotal information that we get from safety codes officers and others saying there's a problem and this happens all the time, but nobody's writing variances and nobody's stopping those applications that are being accepted, and so it becomes a relaxation in the permitting process or the acceptance. That safety codes officer's relaxing code, not doing his due diligence, and subject to penalties under the act. And so this is just a way of saying that when I look at these variances, a variance that I write, if there's going to be a problem with it and somebody's not going to do things. So the variance is being used with this vaporizer, but the variance isn't safe because we don't have protection from impact. We don't have the proper remotes connected for isolating the valves. And so there's a number of things that have been thought about. Now my variance is creating an unsafe condition, and so the variance needs to be pulled. And these are some of the challenges that I face. And it's a reminder for everybody else. When you see a non-compliant system, it needs to be identified as the critical life safety ones so that we can stop these from continuing to be installed, and anything that's deviating from the code with good reason is a variance and justified. If you accept a variance and don't put it in writing, you're actually relaxing code. So do keep that in mind, that just because it is a good idea and it is safe doesn't mean you can accept it and walk away. It shall be documented in writing and then again registered. So keep that in mind. This slide also identifies that there's a bunch of additional requirements because some of the protection from impact was prohibitive on construction sites. So there's been a significant change added to the codes under 719 that allows for a number of different things, such as posts, guardrails, berms, different things can be managed, and a variety of things to be able to fit multiple sites. Just another example, this is really part of the opportunity for the Safety Codes Council and AMOS, as well as other organizations. The program for temporary construction heat and propane, trying to get these installations protected and installed properly, never goes away. And it's everybody's responsibility. Every time you go into a construction site, residential, commercial, somebody should be looking at this. And I don't care whether it's a fireman or a building safety codes officer or a guy with a driver's license. Somebody should know this ain't right. And that, this is everybody's responsibility. How do we keep getting that information out there and education? Sometimes it's enforcement, but it could be, how do we get the tags from the council back out to Amos and back out to everybody and hang them on here? A set of those tags from that temporary construction program would say you can't do this. And, how do we continue to support that? I had some fun this year personally trying to get some clarification over cylinders below grade at a construction site. And we did identify that cylinders shall not be installed below grade at a construction site. And so that was interpreted at the national level with the B149.2. And so it is going to be changed potentially for the 2025 version of the code. But for this one, it'll need to be managed either through enforcement or variance. In the event that you're in a construction site that's really big and all below grade, maybe there's good ways of ensuring that those cylinders can be installed. Or maybe there's a way to put a tank in there below grade and meet the prescriptive requirements of the code. So something for awareness. This is, I'm not sure who this is. This is one of our co-workers has this ice resurfacing equipment, and it's maybe not a good example, but in the propane industry, we now have some clarification in the B149.2 about ice maintenance equipment, and to clarify how to protect that and how to keep people safe while we're using them. Every once in a while, we still get ABS popping up in front of us. ABS that's being used in natural gas venting applications. When they replace the appliance, the hot water tank, the furnace, etc., that venting shall be abandoned. There is no options. There's no retroactivity. That new installation requires 636 venting systems. ABS ain't that. It can't be accepted. I've had people upset about drywall ceilings and historical homes and etc. Sorry, folks, for safety's sake, and we've had some examples with some venting system failures that have caused deaths. I don't want ABS to be contributing to that, or uncertified venting systems. So that's another one to clarify. Annex O within the B149.2 is normative. I like this. Back to that. We've got all these annexes. So you guys are going to have to use the whole bloody code. You're going to have to look at the front matter of it. You're going to have to look at the scope. You're going to have to go all the way to the back and look at the annexes because, well, they're all getting some normative ones. And that means it's prescriptive. You shall meet this requirement. So if you're using cylinders in classrooms, schools, laboratories, universities, here's a bunch of requirements. And there's pages of stuff in here. And it basically says, you know, we can't use more than 20 cylinders. We can't use refillable ones in this type of application. There may be other ways of doing that, but for the use of non-refillable propane cylinders, here's what you get to do, have to do, shall do. And so do keep that in mind. Annex Q and Annex R, look at that. We get quite a few annexes. If you can count all the way up to R, there's lots of annexes. But this is the propane storage and handling code. Most of those annexes are fun. Go in and have a look at them. One's got a picture of a truck, one's got a picture of a house, all of those kinds of things. And that Q, again, is the temporary use of cylinders. It shows exhibition, similar events. And Annex R is the inspection and servicing of pressure relief valves on tanks. And it was basically saying the pressure equipment regulator does this, but we need to know about it. And in Alberta, we actually have notices out there saying, if you're a safety codes officer or a gas fitter and you're standing in front of this container, you need to think about the relief valves. How old is this tank? Is it safe? Is it expired? You know, the owner has to fix it and they have to meet the requirements of the pressure equipment regulator. But this informative code gives us some extra guidance, and this information really follows the documentation that Alberta already has used. So continue on and enjoy that as you're able to. Now, here's a picture of Iron Maiden, just for fun. I don't know if any of you guys are old enough to remember Iron Maiden, but this one was a great opportunity where he's got some flame events that are on hoses and that he can control, and we couldn't seem to keep it safe. We couldn't seem to stop the ability for him to walk out into the audience with this thing on fire. So in the end, there ended up being staff on either side of the stage that could run kill switches, that if he decided to lose his mind and quit following the rules because, well, rock and roll, then somebody could override his ability to use these things and turn him off. And so, boy, I wonder how many people think of that, having a way of turning a man off, even a musician such as these guys. But anyway, I digress. We need to stay on topic here because we've been about an hour and 10 minutes into the presentation. We're on track here at the moment, but I can skip over some stuff fairly quickly. So as we go through this, in the event that I skip over some things and you want to go back to the items on the slides, there will be an opportunity to look at this and see if there's information or questions that would arise after the fact. Well, the B149.3 is a code for the field approval of fuel-related components on appliances and equipment. Oh, no, it's not. It's now the code for field approval of fuel-burning appliances and equipment. So name change, lots of relocation following the other codes, same kind of stuff. Again, this is a highly technical code, significant input in improving the quality of prescriptive requirements for certified products, for products that fall within their appropriate scope of application. And that the valves, regulators, piping assemblies, etc. And then, as we've been talking along this morning, engines, turbines, and compressors have been relocated into there. And that's going to bring about some other challenges for us. Appliances in complex and in integrated facilities. I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes here. The metric versus NPS, that's still happening. So all of these codes had this metrification, and at the same time, we ended up having a generic approach that embraced the fact that a 2-inch pipe's a 2-inch pipe, or so on. And I do like the way that they've cleaned it up while recognizing that I think in British measurements, and so it's been difficult for me to continue to embrace the metric world when we've been so good at fighting it within the B149 codes. There's also a number of annexes, and we'll talk about that. Mobile outdoor units has come into this system in Annex J. Annex K for turbines is in there as well, and we'll talk about a couple of other annexes as well. This is my tank heater picture. I've been using this for over a decade. It's a great one because it shows about 60 code violations, and the only safety feature is the flame arrestor, and the only safety feature that is removed to light it is the flame arrestor. And so this is the best of the worst case scenarios, and yet there's still stuff out there like this. There's still stuff, you can find pieces that are arbitrarily designed this way and thrown in there, whether somebody's using a variance wrong, whether somebody's using their staff wrong, whether a guy with a driver's license and a pipe wrench is thinking he's got a get her done approach. So keep watching these. The stationary engines, lots of them, or hundreds of thousands of them, are they're relatively small. These are V6, V8 engines running pump hydraulics, heat tracing, motive power generators. They're doing lots of work, but boy, there's lots of them are natural gas. So we're moving now into certification and approval of these engines. So there's a UL 2200, this UL 2200 is a certification standard for engines. And so it doesn't cover many of them yet, but it continues to grow. So soon we're going to see engines that are certified, and they'll be compared to engines that are approved. So we've got an engine that's certified or an engine that is approved. We're aligning with our regulation, and then you look at the installation and the prescriptive requirements in the code. And it's going to be a lot simpler, where there will be less chance or less need for a safety codes officer to say, this is a complex project, I need engineering on this. And there'll be less opportunity, or maybe less need, for an engineer to say, I need a third party to look at, or an engineer, for a safety codes officer to say, I need an engineer and or a third party to do an approval on this. It's going to be prescriptive in the structure of the code. Now, because this affects so many, and I'm going to just flip to another picture, this affects so many installations out there. And again, lots of them are relatively simple, and we historically haven't looked at the engine. We've been silent on that. We're looking at the fuel train to the engine. And so, you know, we do get worried about things like hose clamps and stuff like that, but we look at safety shutoff valves and how this is managed. And so some of that's being clarified, simplified, some of that work's going away. But we have a huge push from industry. Industry's looking at this new code saying the B149.3 now requires a field approval. We don't want that. In Alberta, we want the safety codes officer to continue to accept these installations like they always have. So here's my ask. And this is my biggest ask for today, is to all of the safety codes officers out there. Let me know how many gas permits you look at, because they say SCOs are looking at all of these right now. They're all permitted and they're all being done acceptably. We don't want to change things and get a field approval. And so I need to know from safety codes officers how many of these engines are being installed out there and how many are being permitted. If you guys are looking at hundreds of them, well, maybe they've got something to say. If you guys are looking at none of them and you have no gas permits for engines, and that doesn't matter whether this is Calgary or Lethbridge or the MD of Opportunity, there's engines out there, and they require permits, they require compliance with the Act. And where's the problem with these? What's happening with these? And is Alberta in a position to write a province-wide variance to support safety codes officers continuing to look at these very small engines? I'm not talking about big turbines or the big Caterpillars that are running at 500 RPM and 2.5 stories tall. Big engines, turbines, they're complex. They're always going to be in this new structure with field approvals and installation. But for existing small engines, if you guys are fine with it, I need to know that, because the industry's saying don't change it, don't let us do this. And there's currently right now under red tape reduction, there's support from government and strong support from government not to move in the direction of having all of these small engines looked at by a safety codes officer for the installation and a field approval authority under a variance or under an inspection body to look at these. So I really need feedback from you guys. Let me know. Are you getting permits? Do you look at them? Is it just accredited corporations that are doing this? Is everybody looking at these? Because there should be lots of them. And you know what? Reach out to other safety codes officers that can't be here today. Ask them as well. Because before the end of 2020, we're going to be asked or told to consider this. So I'm telling you, the code's moving engines into the B149.3 industry, and particularly the upstream oil and gas industry is saying we can't have that. And so your input is critical to me. Thanks, guys. Here's one that came from one of our guests today. This is a cogen. It actually came from a couple of guys. The picture's really busy, but I kind of wanted to show everybody here. We got a cogen facility where they're burning natural gas, producing electricity, hot water, doing other things with it. But we've got close nipples in the gas line. We've got street 90s in the gas line. We've got some you can see are literally bottomed out. There isn't a thread left in them. And are they properly sealed, tested? What was the requirements that they used for it? Anybody that looks over in the right-hand corner is going to be able to see that this ENIGNI meets US EPA. That triggers a funny, the hair stands up on the back of my neck when engine is spelled E-N-I-G-N-E. And so that might mean something. And so watch these things. These things need to be certified or approved. They need to be installed meeting the minimum requirements. So, the hose clamp of the flex connector onto 636, is that manufacturer's installation instructions? I'm not sure. And so, but I would watch that. These plumbing installations with galvanized brass, plastic through a rough cut hole and tin, the list kind of goes on. And so is this just questionable installation? Is this a DIY? Is this a homeowner doing this? I'm not trying to get into a whole bunch of stuff, but cogens are out there. If you guys have any issues with them, talk to me, because this could just be an issue with a spelling mistake, because the certification label looks good on it. But at the same time, is it a fraudulent label? Is this a product that's not certified for the Canadian market, watch these. And particularly, some are being permitted, great. Some are being installed and they do whatever they want. We only get to see what we get. Make sure on your permitted activities that you identify that mark down what you see and don't mark down what you don't see. Make sure that you're protecting yourself while you're doing compliance monitoring, so that somebody that does some of this crap after you go needs to be it needs to be their responsibility. This is the responsibility of the owner, and so protection from that needs to go along with the things we've always learned about our due diligence. Mark down what you see, and don't mark down what you don't see. Don't put in an installation report that, or an inspection report that says passed. This one here, you wouldn't want to do that. Put down what's there and identify what needs to be done. And reach out to AMA, reach out to your co-workers. There are other guys having experiences with this, so talk to Amos, talk to the executive, talk to the duty officer with AMA. Also, too, many of you know who's on the gas sub-council. Those are the guys to reach out to. Annex I. I'm not going to go through these too much detail today, but this is the big deal in the B149.3, and this is about the risk-based approach to evaluating equipment. But it's not simple. You can't say I did a risk-based approach and done. No, they've got to prove how they've done that. How did they reach that? How did they establish a team? And the team needs to have evidence and history and experience and professional foundation. And so these things are going to be challenging, but we want to make sure that we end up with simple things like this catalytic heater that's been improperly installed facing another catalytic heater, and then modified far outside of its scope of certification, all the way up to the biggest turbines, to the biggest reformers. They're 6 stories high, 400 million BTUs, 400 burners at 1 million BTUs each. Those all come down to, it may make sense to use a Annex I approach, but we don't have a lot of experience with it yet. We're going to see that. So complex and integrated facility has been put in this code so that Annex I, even though it's informative, doesn't get used just anywhere. It gets used at a complex and integrated facility, and that's a petrochemical refinery, a manufacturing petrochemical facility, resin and synthetic rubber manufacturing. And so if a lumber mill wants to use Annex I, they need to do it through a variance process. There is no other way for them to consider that objective-based approach, because it's only defined to be considered within that informative annex as a complex and integrated facility. So again, this is about trying to manage who wants Annex I and who can use it and what's it going to do for us. Annex J, mobile outdoor food equipment. We now have an informative annex. This is taking a bunch of stuff out of NFPA 96 that follows what our stand data in Alberta for mobile food trucks is, and it's putting it in the body of the code. So this is our first step towards getting mobile equipment in the code and mobile food service equipment in the code. And so the information's there to use as a guide for those prescriptive requirements that have the ability to use that. It's a significant step, and it's really started national discussions about what's portable, what's on wheels, how are we going to deal with that stuff. And I'll get back to that just a minute here. Again, a bit of a change of pace. Don't forget to remind gas fitters when you talk them, use backups. So gas-fired, this is a bit of housekeeping here with municipal affairs. Gas-fired appliances for heating buildings under construction. It's still out there. It's going to be out there because we still get some furnaces that are used for construction and not maintained properly. And so there's more and more pressure saying this is up to the authority having jurisdiction. That enforcement is responsible for making sure that the manufacturer's installation instructions are maintained. And so temporary heat furnaces that are used for occupancy need to be able to be inspected and cleaned properly and maintained properly, meet the minimum requirements, including potentially proving efficiency rates. So combustion analysis and those kind of things are going to be necessary in order to do a final inspection on a house. You're going to see a furnace, regardless of whether it was used for construction or not. You're going to have to see a prescriptive set of requirements, including a report that says that appliance is fine to use. Or maybe you have to assume it's at 80% of its life expectancy and doesn't meet the intent of the code. So we'll be talking about that more as the new standard for furnaces comes out, because there's lots of stuff still happening nationally regarding if you build a $500,000 house, chances are you're going to want a new furnace, and lots of people aren't. And that might just be my opinion. Strike that from the record, whoever's recording the show. But there may be individuals and organizations out there that struggle to maintain the quality of the heating system after construction. There's also others. Temporary heat in all of its application is an issue. This one here, I always worry about high altitude with resonors, but there might be other things to look at too. Swing joints. This is certainly a cool picture of a swing joint, but it's also an issue where we're talking about what the regulators are doing, where the regulators are, the meter, what's the utility doing, and what's their role. And as the Safety Codes Council, sub-council, looks at the permit regulation, we're talking about what is the role of the utility and where is the jurisdiction. At what point do we want to end where this the meter sits? And again, this is another one. The regulators that are venting out of there need to be considered. And after effects of who was first, who was second, isn't always something we can identify and may not matter. Again, this is part of the national discussion to consider what about adjoining property? What about hazardous frost and ice accumulations? Should other codes be in on this so that we can get the support we need? Certified versus modified. And this is, if you've got a certified piece of equipment, it falls under the gas code regulation, no problem. As soon as they modify it, change the valve that's part of that certification, it's now uncertified piece of equipment. It needs to be field approved or removed. So I want everybody to keep being mindful of that. Is it certified and is it as intended, or has it been modified beyond its scope? The province-wide variance for authentication at oil field sites, it's continuing to be utilized out there. I have heard information that people are concerned about how it's getting used or unused or misused, and continue to look for information back from the industry about what works and what doesn't work. We need to have these uncertified pieces of fired equipment labeled and in a way that when you show up at that installation, you can recognize that label. And you know whether it's engineered with the variance, a third-party inspection body, and you know that it's designed for that location and hasn't been relocated without an approval. Then as soon as they put this tank on wheels, then we have to have a different conversation. And that one we'll have for another day, but I'll try to keep that in mind. The plant stand data that's really is being modified at the moment, and we have industry coming up with some new drawings on it to be able to help us talk about where's the difference between the utility and the gas installation, and the difference between the gas installation, pressure equipment installation, and what happens when we bring in the energy regulator or others. And so we'll be seeing these, all of the stand data updated by the end of 2020, but this is one that I hope to see really mature. ABS is currently working on this, as well as a handful of other documents. Our tip sheet for appliances it's getting old. It doesn't match the current province-wide variance, and we're looking at what value it has regarding the oil and gas industry versus other portions of the industry, pulp and paper, power generation, and etc. And is it really helping us? And should it be updated or not? So we'll be looking at that here this summer and fall. Picture of an appliance. This might be a manually fired appliance. This might be an appliance that only works when it is somebody standing there operating it, and it may not be automatic. So it's created some new challenges in the industry between what's an appliance and what's a piece of equipment and what's a torch. Legacy equipments, it terminated in the end of December. The program is closed. We had a huge growth in compliance with the industry, but also a huge growth in understanding for the industry with how to do it. Now, not everybody's got it right, but the program did end, and now people are saying, well, what about legacy equipment for engines? Well, engines were never part of legacy equipment. They were never part of an exemption. They were never part of a variance, ever. They were always part of the gas code regulation and always required compliance. And so I'm doing my best to discourage any legacy type program for anything as we go forward. We did that for that time, and the industry has been supported through the development of IBs and inspection body program, as well as province-wide variances for better or for worse, and they have the tools to be able to comply. So that notice that's shown there, that's now expired, and as part of red tape reduction, it'll be removed as recognized through that process in government. In the industry, we talk about uncertified appliances, and I talk lots about engines today, but it goes far beyond that. Here's an example of a propane container inside a job shack right next to the diesel fuel. That way, they never have problems with vaporization rates. And I apologize, folks, if I'm being smart over something that's really non-compliant. I don't intend that. This cannot ever be done. So my intent to try to keep the conversation light doesn't manage this. If this is an empty steel container, sure, they can store it in there. If this is a propane container, it cannot ever be in there. So thanks for that. Stuff on wheels, it's becoming a big topic nationally, all over the place. And so I've had issues with this. We've got some asphalt heating equipment here, some fracking equipment. And as soon as you get these out there, they still need to be approved or certified. They still need to be managing this. Now, we may not see permits for them all the time, but it does come up. So here's an agricultural burner that's used for sterilization of the ground, or at least for burning soil and weed control. And so some of these are do-it-yourselfers. Some are quite sophisticated, and yet they need to be compliant, and we need to have containers that can be moved with product in them. So a container that can't be moved with more than 5% is improper here, and this is actually one of them. This container can't be used in this application. But we're seeing new stuff coming in from Europe as this is identified as a green machine. So we're seeing some of these approved in the Alberta market. And they, again, different levels of sophistication and different potential volumes for propane and different examples of success. The B108 and 109, wanted just to touch base with them to say the 2020 code of the B108 is due the 1st of 2021, and the 2021 code of the B109 is due at the end of 2021. So we're very close. We might see the 2020 code of the 108 here this year, so that triggers that within 1 year it comes into force. So the natural gas fueling station code may not be affecting many of us, but for those of us that do, it's LNG that's the biggest change within the code. And we've also got things where, you know, where's LNG? How do we tell it? Does it look the same? Does it act the same? And it can be really difficult with all of the challenges around cryogenics. And by looking at these 4 trucks, can you tell that they're all different roles? One will produce LNG, one will just dispense LNG, one will just meter LNG, and so on. And that these types of installations, whether they're at a drilling rig or a fracking assembly or in a parking lot somewhere in a jurisdiction near you, and they're filling highway tractors with LNG. What happens if a farmer figures out how to do this? And we start seeing John Deere out there with LNG on it. Like, I've been talking like this, it's a domino. When that domino knocks over and somebody figures out how to do this with LNG, there'll be no stopping. And I can't believe John Deere doesn't have one out yet. Okay, just some generic stuff to keep in mind. LNG and CNG are such different animals. Odorant, no odorant, pressure versus temperature versus, you know, the structure, the potential energy that's held in LNG is totally different than CNG, and so they're really different animals. Keep thinking that way. Okay, so we've got unsafe conditions. That's for me. Keep letting me know when you see stuff, hear stuff, what's happening out there. Because, you know, if an issue happens and it creates a fire, explosion, property damage due to that fire, it shall be reported. But I'm certainly interested in finding out what's happening out there in the industry. This is one of mine from last summer at rodeo in eastern Alberta, where the deep fryer was way too hot inside, so they brought it outside. And it's always fun to look at this and think, did they really have to install it that way? Did they really have to put the hottest piece of appliance with boiling oil in the entire facility that close to a container? So, and just because it's rated for installation on a combustible floor doesn't mean you'll always get away with it. What happens when it's installed improperly? What happens when manufacturer's installation instructions aren't completed, or the piece of equipment isn't assembled properly and overfires or creates some other opportunity? Here's one from just a couple weeks ago. Lots of you folks seen this on the news. This explosion, and I'm assuming some fire, but very little fire damage. The explosion was so great. Family of 6 sent to the hospital. This is central northern Alberta. And this was done with a 1-pound cylinder. So the investigation identified that it may not have been impacted by the 20-pounders, the two 20-pounders that are at the front of this fifth wheel, but there was a 1-pound container with a camping heater that's for use outside only, was stored, or rather was found in the shower compartment in here. And what it brings up for me, or for today, is that across Canada, we're struggling with 1-pound containers. What happens when people start refilling 1-pound refillable containers themselves because they can't do that? You need to be properly qualified to refill them. What happens when people start refilling non-refillable 1-pound containers? Because there's a schwack of adapters on the internet that are available out there. And I hate to see people using them, and yet we're not seeing a lot of examples. You know, the problems with the release of gas lots of times isn't creating an incident that brings in the authorities, and people aren't willing to say, I bought an illegal adapter off of Amazon and I use it all the time. Except when we're sitting around at our wine and cheese functions at Amos. You hear about the odd adapter that somebody's heard of or seen. I don't know anybody that's ever bought one, but I hear lots of stories about them. I really need data from this in order to do things at the national level and to try to have a bigger impact on Amazon and Google and others on trying to prevent these unsafe products from entering the Canadian market. We need examples where things have gone wrong. So when you hear about somebody that had a 1 pound refillable or non-refillable container get away from them in an inappropriate action to try to fill it and save a few bucks, let me know. Any information you can get, I'll take. Okay, that's essentially the end of today's presentation for the gas discipline, but I have a couple of other slides here just to address either questions that people have sent me recently and to let everybody know that I'm still thinking about plumbing. The 2020 plumbing code's expected in spring of 2021. That's going to be tough. It's still going to say 2020, even if it's later in 2021 that it's published. And then we'll start that process. But we should have a 3-column comparison document clean and available this fall. So hopefully for the Amos meetings, we'll have that document available to share. We're still working with Alberta Environment and Alberta Health on the water reuse policy documents. These are monster documents, and I think they're critical for Alberta to say, here's how you know whose responsibility it is. This is the municipalities, this is environments, this is municipal affairs, or this is the local authorities. As well as, what's the water quality? Here's the water you got. You're taking it out of a pond, out of a sewer, out of the air, whatever you're doing. And here's what you're going to treat it to. And this is what you're going to get in the end. And here's how you maintain it. These are really big steps, and they've been really important. And we've sure been impacted by government, by things like COVID and stuff like that. But I know some really bright people are still working really hard on this. And don't give up hope. Guys, hang in there. These documents are going to help us, and they're coming. I know some of you have worked on the documents, and hopefully we'll be able to see them sooner rather than later. One of the questions that came up was grease traps are expected to be designed according to demand. If they're utilizing standards, meeting the prescriptive requirements of the National Plumbing Code of Canada, they need to be able to handle the temperatures allowed. So if somebody's discharging 75 degrees into a grease trap, it needs to be big enough to ensure that grease is not diverted into the waste stream. It has to be maintained in that trap. And so how do we identify those design requirements? And can we, through certification, and those things are supposed to be there. So if you guys are finding grease traps are being used in a way that's outside of the certification, well, that's reasonable grounds for a professional involvement or potential failure of that installation. And in the event that these are certified for the conditions and identify that, they're intended to be designed for those set of conditions. So that's something we can look at more, but I wanted to say that that you can't put a grease trap in a system that has temperatures of no more than 75, so 75 degrees C or less. And you're right, boy, you could take a lot of grease in that temperature water forward, so that has to be designed to retain it long enough to allow for that separation or to have other action that makes sure that that grease is not entrained in the waste stream. Hopefully that answered that. And so without any ado, we're at about 9:45. I'll say thank you and look to for an opportunity for some questions. And so I would I don't know if we need to turn it back over or how you're going to start question period. I've been distracted a bit and not watching them lots.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, you and I can just sort of have a back and forth here. I have them all gathered together, and I'll ask them in the order I received them. If Sydney or I need any confirmation from the question asker, please respond in chat. Otherwise, it'll take me a really long time to find you and unmute you. So that's going to be the easiest way if we just have a question for your question. Also, just a heads up, I'm not a subject matter expert, so if I say something that sounds funny, you can laugh. You're on mute. I'm not going to hear you. If your question was more or less answered by Sydney in the presentation, I'm also not going to know about it, so I apologize if we have any repetitive content. I didn't think we did. So our first question is regarding a relocated older home. The question asker says, I have run across an older home moved into a new location. I noticed that the majority of the existing threaded steel pipe and fittings are concealed within ceiling spaces. Is this now allowed, or do I have to install all new accessible piping? Is a fresh air duct into the return air of the furnace ducting still allowed and adequate, or is more required nowadays in relocated older homes?
Okay, there's two questions there. I'm not sure I can handle two at a time, so heads up,
sorry.
guys.
Do you want me to ask one and then the next?
No,
Okay.
With this one I'm fine. So a relocatable older home. I would start with the discussion that a gas line installed in an existing home was inspected and accepted before it was enclosed. So that gas line met the requirements of the code at the time, but there are things you can't know. Is it being used for exactly what it was originally intended for, and so does the size stay the same? Does it increase in size or decrease in size? So we don't know that, but in the event that it appears to meet the intent of that, there are ways of testing to make sure the appliances are operating properly, and you want to make sure that that gas line is tested, because that house may not have ever intended to be moved, and so now that it's been picked up and relocated to who knows where, under what set of conditions, you want to be confident in that. And so I would be really sticky on making sure that verification of pressure testing was maintained, and ability to ensure that the enclosed portion of it addresses the existing pieces of equipment or is tested to provide proper flow rates for what's above that. So I think we need to be flexible in that case, but I wouldn't start by requiring everything to be open. We should be able to be flexible. We don't have that many or that often. But each one's going to be considered on a case-by-case basis. If you see a risk that I couldn't consider here, it may need to be opened, and they may need to deal with that. For the fresh air duct, that all still is acceptable. You can still use a fresh air duct to supply fresh air or ventilation requirements under the building code. But I wouldn't want to be using that to supply combustion air. So we still need combustion air independent of that fresh air. There was some flexibility historically, but now it can be used. Do recognize, though, with new appliances, new home construction, a lot of things, the minimums and maximums in the building code have changed to the point that you need to recognize that the fresh air may not be enough fresh air. It may be too big for the appliance that's being installed if it's in a retrofit or a relocated home. And so although the fresh air can be used through the return air, that's still a reasonable approach. There's limitations that have to be recognized. So anybody that has particulars on that specific question, if you've got some other details and you want to get down to the prescriptive requirements in Part 9 of the building code, I'd be more than happy to look at that or direct you to that discipline to make sure that the fresh air could still be used. Thanks. Next question, please.
All right. Our next question is regarding issues with portable propane heaters being sold as on-demand water heaters for camping. They are being advertised as quote-unquote CSA gas regulators, yet there aren't certifications on the units. Are these being seen a lot in the field?
I think they're going to be seen a lot in the field, and if they're not, they're coming. They're cheap, they're effective, they're really easy to get off of the internet. You can look at, I can probably come up with 10 or so different kinds. So these off-grid applications that we don't get permits for, don't hear about, man, they're going to be tough to catch. But they need to be certified for the Canadian market. They can be certified. We check to make sure that there's standards available for them, but the industry's not doing that. It's expensive to get them certified, and that's why an instantaneous water tank's bloody expensive. But you can get these camping ones for $200 on the internet. And they need to be certified or approved. So in a permitted application, you're going to need to reject them. Now, can they get an approval on it? Probably. Is it cost prohibitive? Probably. So do keep that in mind, that it would be reasonable to expect an owner to get a certified product or have an approved product. That's part of the requirements for it. And so I think we're going to see more and more of these. I've done some pushing nationally for it, and as you guys report these, if you see them, the camping heaters, and you're getting to see them because you get permits on them, because lots of these are easy. You can hook up a bladder to for a water supply and hook them up with the integral tank into a propane container. Lots of people couldn't imagine getting a permit for that. But that owner's still responsible to make sure that that is certified or approved. And so for the ones you get to see, hold them to it. Thank you.
All right, now we have a question about accessing the B149 code. Where do you get the 2020 version? I think specifically the question was about a digital version. Is it free like the codes from the NRC?
Okay, the first slides in the presentation do talk about that, about the codes, and I have some notes in the presentation as well. But you can go directly to CSA for the codes. On the CSA website and through the communities of interest portion of their site, the codes are accessible and you can go in and look at them for free. But if you want to get the course and get the handbook, you have to buy the code. And so when you buy the code, you get all of this stuff with them, or there's options with packages for buying a 1, 2, 3, 5, etc. So when you buy the code, make sure you know that you're getting your course so that you can meet your requirements as a safety codes officer, or you can test yourself against their identification of principal changes. But also, too, you can get the handbook, which is a neat tool that's becoming more and more interactive. And those are available electronically for purchase and in paper, and they're different rates, and all through CSA. That's where we would suggest everybody go. Thank you.
All right. Next question, is there a minimum size for test cocks downstream of line regulators?
A 1/4 inch. That's just off the top of my head. I will check on that. There's lots of the industry hates using them 1/4 inch because it's pretty easy for a guy running along with a set of coveralls on to catch them and break them off. And broken off 1/4 inch test port is a real problem in an industrial site. So there is some moves towards being able to allow for larger sizes, but the minimum would be 1/4. Thank you.
Okay, next question. The annexes information sections are for information and recommendations. Would the SCO be able to enforce the requirements of these sections since these are labeled as recommended?
If the annex is normative, and we talked about that a bunch today, you have the authority to enforce that, and they're prescriptive. People shall meet those minimum requirements. If the annex is informative, you have a challenge. Then what it is that informative annex relates back to a prescriptive clause. So somewhere in the code it says, you shall size the gas line according to this formula. And then if people go to the annex and use the sizing tables and you're happy with that, great. But if they don't follow the sizing tables, the only way you can force them to is to follow the prescriptive requirements in the code. And so it can take some wrangling, but all of the information bulletins are intended to be guidelines, and I often use them to say the prescriptive requirements of the code say do this or that, and you shall do this. What happens is people end up in those conditions trying to figure out what does shall mean, or how do I truly meet the intent of that. The annexes are intended to help with that. So if you've got a food truck now, somebody's going to say, I want to meet all of the requirements in the food truck, but not the requirements in the prescriptive part of the code. That's not what it's meant to do. It's meant to say, you got to meet all these requirements in the code, but for stuff that's gray areas or stuff that's in the code that really doesn't apply to a food truck, here's some information in an annex that will explain to you and potentially designers and other authorities that that prescriptive part of the code doesn't have to apply to this. And here's some things you could do to meet the prescriptive intent of the main body of the code. So again, I've used this for years, and we used to do it with hydronic heating really well, that we had a stand data that said a whole bunch of stuff, but it was just information. You couldn't make anybody do it. But we had a code that said, if the authority thinks something needs to be done, it shall be done. And so we were able to take the code and give the authority to the safety codes officer to require that a stand data be met. And it allowed flexibility in there as well. So hopefully that helped with that. And if you have any further issues regarding applying an annex, bring it up at AMAS, bring it up to AMA. That's where we should be talking about this. We can get around a table and say, what part of that annex tripped you up and put you in a position where you didn't feel you were complying with the code, or where you didn't feel you had the authority to do something. And we'll find you a way back into the code that allows you to do that. Thank you.
All right, next question. We have 3 more. Where to draw the line on variance approvals between the SCOs and the administrator?
Right now, the line's a little wobbly on reduction of clearances. And so for private sewage disposal systems, that's all been published now. Safety codes officers issue all of those variances for reduction in clearances. If you have a reduction in clearance in the gas or the plumbing discipline, we'll work together on it. If it comes to me, I'll look at it. If safety codes officer wants to do it, that would be reasonable, because that's the direction we're headed in. Where we're really trying to be black and white is with materials and equipment. If somebody wants to approve a piece of equipment, we don't want safety codes officers doing that. Now, utilizing a piece of stainless steel pipe in a brand new and exciting way might be reasonable for a safety codes officer to consider, but at the moment, I'm not saying do that. So at the moment, if it's a material being used for something new and exciting, it's only the administrator. If it's equipment that they're looking for variances, it's only the administrator. And we'll come out with some information, because I want inspection bodies and variance users, such as engineers, to be approving equipment as an extension of my authority. That is never intended to be a safety codes officer. And I don't want a safety codes officer to be put in a position where he's being forced to accept a 500 million BTU appliance because somebody's cornered him on a variance condition or a new way of looking at it. So we don't want safety codes officers to be put in a position where you're accepting liability for approving equipment. Don't get into that. So that's why we're really trying to stay controlled on the variance until the industry's ready, until Amos says they're ready, until Safety Codes Council, the sub-council says they're ready for safety codes officers to be able to manage this risk and not get themselves moved out of B149 1 and 2. I don't want you guys to end up spending unusual amounts of time in B149 3 and approving stuff for the sake of cost and accepting an unbelievable liability. Okay, hopefully that helps. We'll be talking more this fall on reduction of clearances to get that a little more black and white. Thanks.
All right, second to last question. Would you require the ABS combustion air pipe to be replaced if it's a retrofit?
No. There's the combustion air pipe could be a dryer vent. It really doesn't matter as long as it meets the flame and smoke spread requirements out of the building code for where it's installed and structurally integral enough to be able to hold its shape and let that much air into the appliance. No requirement. It's always been a good idea to use the same material on the exhaust as the combustion air because you never mix them up then. But if somebody leaves ABS on it, no problem. It's the vent that's required and prescriptive in the code. Thank you.
All right, our last question is the one that Mike just sent. I'll read it aloud for those who can't see the chat. We have a used manufactured home just moved into our jurisdiction that has a gas B vented water heater that installed within a space constructed by the manufacturer in the bedroom closet. It has a panel with a door for access to light the heater. There is an AMA label affixed to the electrical panel. Do we accept this installation or ask them to install a direct vented water heater?
I don't know yet. Not quite enough information there, but I'll give you a couple of scenarios. You could accept that, assuming that the appliance has been certified and certified to the proper standards and codes. That may mean, is it brand new or is it old? And just because it looks brand new doesn't mean it wasn't built to an earlier code. So the requirements for combustion air and access to a bedroom and etc. Is there combustion air coming in through the floor? Is the combustion air coming in through the panel, in through the bedroom? Some of those things need to clarify. But in short, I know there's lots of them out there, and I think there's still reasonable that there's lots of existing ones that would be sold utilizing that design. But just because it's a hot water tank doesn't mean it doesn't need combustion air. And so we got to make sure that it's got air supply from the house, from the space, from the outside, and that it meets the other prescriptive requirements of the code. And so if they can't meet the ventilation requirements or the location requirements, combustion air, you may need to require that it's pulled. But I know lots of these are acceptable. And so look to the certification of it, the age of it. It may have been acceptable at the time, and touch base with me with some of these other details if we need to make sure that we've got the right set of scenarios, so I'm not making suggestions for something that's prohibited. Folks, before we ask another question, we're just about we're 2 after 11. I don't mind answering questions, staying on. For those that need to go, we would expect that. I appreciate the time and being able to do this. I tried to cram a whack of stuff in here in this amount of time, and sorry I wasn't able to share all the jokes that I had because we had to stay on topic. So hopefully I get invited back to Amos or other things where we can where I can tell the rest of the stories in the way they were intended to be. But before I lose anybody or erode away our extra time, do we have another question? Yes, no, maybe. Hello? I'm not hearing. Katie, I don't know if I've
No, I
lost you.
don't see anything on our
Oh, okay.
email. I just checked. I was wondering, you mentioned SCOs providing input to you. Is the best way to do that through the safety services email and phone number?
Yes, it typically is. My challenge this year with COVID is that all of the national meetings have been split up into so many components that I'm in a meeting all of the time, every day. And so there's just no easy way to make sure I'm available. If you talk to safety services, the duty officer can help. If they can't, they know when to get a hold of me. I'll do my best to participate as available. So calling safety services, emailing that's the best way to do it, because then you get a team looking to help you, and you don't have to worry about whether I'm in a meeting or on a holiday. So not having anything more, again, I really appreciate the opportunity. I hope that these kind of things continue, because I know we're going to have some plumbing stuff come up. And like I talked before earlier, I think there's some great opportunities where we could do some of this stuff with Amos and be able to take advantage of resources through the Safety Codes Council and keep this information out there. You know, we can focus on regulators, or we can focus on industrial installations, and you know, how to actually fill in an inspection report while covering your backside with both hands. So you know, keep that in mind. Again, thanks tons. I really appreciate everybody's willingness to listen in. If you find anything or have any doubts about anything I said that that I've either misinterpreted or you question, bring them up to us. We want to make sure this is transparent and follows the intent of the new codes that are coming. So I really appreciate everything. Thanks very much to everyone, and back over to you, Katie.
All right, guys, thanks so much for coming. You can go ahead and hit leave meeting whenever you're done. Thank you so much for coming today and for participating with your questions and everything else. Like I said in the chat, the video should be posted in the next 2 weeks, barring any disaster. And your continuing education credits should also be uploaded in about that time frame as well, hopefully sooner than later. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks so much.